I'm lying on my back staring at a water stain on my ceiling that I've been meaning to report to the building manager for 6 months. 6 months. I know its exact shape. I know which corner darkened first. I know that on rainy nights it spreads slightly to the left, like it's reaching for something. I've watched it the way you watch something you don't want to admit you're watching. Kind of like how I've been watching her. It's 3:14 in the morning, and I have a deposition at 8. I have 17 tabs open on my laptop that I haven't looked at since Tuesday. I have a half-eaten sleeve of crackers on my nightstand, and a glass of water I keep meaning to drink, and don't. And I'm thinking about the way Lei tilted her head when she laughed today. Not even laughed. Smiled. That thing she does when something catches her off guard, when something is funnier than she expected it to be. And her whole face has to recalibrate for a second before the smile arrives. I've started cataloging these moments without realizing I was doing it. I tell myself, she's the cleaning woman, Ruth. I actually say it out loud sometimes. In the elevator, in the bathroom, at work. She's the cleaning woman and you work on the 14th floor, and you've barely spoken more than 40 words to each other. And whatever you think you're feeling is just loneliness wearing a convincing costume. I'm very good at convincing myself of things. I passed the bar on the first try. I made junior partner in 4 years. I have a plant on my windowsill that has been alive for 2 years because I decided it would live, and I watered it on schedule, and I refused to let it die out of sheer force of will. I cannot will this away. That's the part I keep circling back to, here, at 3:14 in the morning, in the dark. I've tried everything I know how to try. I've stayed late. I've left early. I've taken the stairs to avoid the lobby. I've had entire detailed conversations with myself, laying out the reasons this is impractical and slightly absurd, and probably just me projecting something I need onto someone convenient. And then she smiles like that. And every single one of my arguments becomes absolutely useless. I roll onto my side. I close my eyes. I think about the way she says my name. Ruth. 2 letters, 1 syllable. Nothing special about it. It's my name. It's just a name. People say it 40 times a day and it means nothing. But when Lei says it, she pauses just slightly before it. Like she's making sure she has my attention before she speaks. Like she knows that what she's about to say matters, and she wants to make sure I'm ready to receive it. I don't know if she knows she does that. I don't know if she knows a lot of things. I don't know anything right now. Lying here in the dark, which is not a state I'm accustomed to. I should sleep. I'm not going to sleep. I moved into the Alderton building 3 years ago, and for the first 2 of those years, I barely noticed anything below the 14th floor. That sounds worse than I mean it to. I'm not the kind of person who thinks she's better than anyone. I've just always been the kind of person who moves through spaces with her head down and her earbuds in, and her coffee held like a shield, and the Alderton building was no different. I knew my floor. I knew the elevator codes. I knew that the coffee machine in the break room on 14 made better espresso than the one in the lobby. And I knew to get there before 8, because after 8, it was always empty. I didn't know the cleaning staff's schedule. I didn't know their names. I wasn't cruel about it. I just wasn't present. I want to be honest about that. The first time I actually registered that Lei existed was on a Wednesday in October, almost 18 months ago. I'd worked late, past 9, which wasn't unusual, and I was coming back to my office from the copy room with a stack of files I hadn't had time to review during the day. The hallways on 14 were mostly empty. The overhead lights had switched to their after-hours dimming cycle, the warm yellow-toned ones that make everything look slightly more like a movie than like an office building. She was at the far end of the corridor, pushing one of those large industrial carts, the ones with the mop bucket on one side and the cleaning supplies on the other. She had earbuds in, and she was moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this particular route so many times it lives in her body, not her mind. The cart didn't make the usual clattering noise. Her footsteps were soft. She was just a shape at the end of a hallway, doing her job. I noticed her the same way you notice a bird on a wire. Peripheral. Gone the next moment. Then she turned around. I don't know what made her turn. Maybe she sensed movement. Maybe she heard something. But she turned, and I was close enough by then that she could see my face, and she pulled one earbud out and said, "Sorry, I thought everyone had gone for the night." Her voice surprised me. I'm not sure what I expected. Something smaller, maybe. Her voice was unhurried, low and level, like she wasn't surprised by much. "Still here," I said. Brilliant conversationalist. She nodded, put the earbud back, went back to her cart. I went back to my office. And that was the first time. I didn't think about it afterward. Not consciously. I cataloged it the same way you catalog any neutral interaction. She apologized, I acknowledged. We both moved on. I had a brief on the Kaplan case due in 3 days, and approximately no time to think about anything that wasn't inside that brief. But something registered. Something filed itself away without asking my permission. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing the cleaning cart outside different offices at different times. Started noticing the patterns. Wednesday nights on 14, Tuesday, and Thursday mornings in the lobby, Friday afternoons in the conference rooms. I told myself I was noticing the schedule the same way I notice anything that affects the space I move through. I am an organized person. I like to know what to expect. That was the story I told myself. I started staying later on Wednesdays. I told myself that had nothing to do with anything. The second time we spoke was about a month later. I was in the kitchen on 14 at 9:30 p.m., attempting to make tea because I'd given up caffeine for November in a fit of optimism, and the electric kettle was being uncooperative. Lei came in to clean the kitchen. She saw me standing there, rattling the kettle's base like it had personally offended me, and she crossed the room and pressed the button I had somehow been missing, and the kettle hummed to life. "The base is off-center," she said. "You have to push it a little to the left before it locks." I stared at her, then at the kettle, then back at her. "I've been using this kettle for 3 years," I said. "I know." A small pause. Then, quietly, "I fixed it twice." And then she went back to wiping down the counters. I stood there holding my tea bag and feeling, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, like I'd been gently handed information about myself that I hadn't known I was missing. After that, we started talking, not in any formal or decided way. There was no moment where we agreed to be the kind of people who stopped and spoke to each other. It was just that the Wednesday nights became something I didn't leave before they finished, and somehow there was always a reason to be in the kitchen, or the copy room, or the hallway at the particular time when she came through. And we'd exchange 5 minutes, 10 minutes, occasionally 20. I learned things slowly, the way you learn things about someone when the time you have together is unpredictable and finite. Her name was Lei, short for Leilani, which she'd told me once with a look that suggested she didn't offer it to everyone. She'd been working in the Alderton building for 4 years, starting in the lobbies and working her way up to the residential and commercial floors. She had a daughter who was 8 years old named Petra, who she described with a specific kind of exhausted pride. The pride of someone who has poured everything she has into one particular person and knows it was the right decision even when it's hard. She was studying remotely, accounting, 2 nights a week, and she'd been doing it for 2 years and had 1 year left. She was 31, 2 years younger than me. I told her things too, which surprised me. I'm not a person who volunteers personal information easily. I live alone, I work constantly. I have 2 close friends, my college roommate Diane, who lives in Portland and calls me every Sunday, and my colleague Simone, who is the only person at the firm who can make me laugh until my coffee comes out of my nose. I have a family that loves me in a brisk New England way that involves Christmas cards and weekly check-in texts and very few conversations about anything that actually matters. I told Lei about the Kaplan case in more detail than I'd intended to. I told her about my plant and how I'd decided it would live. I told her that I'd originally wanted to be a marine biologist, which I've told approximately 4 people in my adult life, and she asked me why I hadn't, and I gave her my usual answer about the job market and student loans and practical choices. And she was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's a lot of reasons. Did any of them feel like yours?" No one had ever asked me that before. I didn't answer. She didn't push. That was another thing I noticed about Lei, the particular quality of her silence. She wasn't comfortable with silence because she was indifferent. She was comfortable with silence because she genuinely believed that some answers needed more time than a conversation allowed, and that it was fine, actually, to not rush them. I wasn't built like that. I have always rushed toward the answer. It's how I was trained, how I trained myself. Identify the question, gather the evidence, arrive at the conclusion. Motion forward. Always motion forward. Lei's silences made me still in a way I couldn't fully explain. Like she was somehow creating, just by being quiet, a space where the rushing wasn't necessary. I didn't know what to do with that. I told myself, this is what it's like to have a new friend. I'd made fewer of those than I realized in my adult life. Most of my relationships had been with people from law school, from the firm, from contexts that were already structured and professionalized and therefore never required me to actually be a person rather than a professional. Lei was none of those things. She didn't know me as junior partner. She just knew me as the woman who couldn't operate the kettle. There was something light about that. Or at least it should have been light. By January, I was staying late every Wednesday without deciding to. By February, I'd started bringing 2 cups of tea to the kitchen at 9:30. One for me, one in case she wanted it, which I framed to myself as simple courtesy. She started accepting without comment, which I took as further evidence that this was all perfectly normal. By March, I knew the exact shade her eyes went in bad fluorescent light versus good. A warm amber in the corridor fixtures on 14, something closer to gold in the kitchen's overhead LEDs, and a kind of honey dark in the lobby in late afternoon. I knew this the way you know things you've been quietly studying for months without admitting you're a student. I was very good at not admitting things to myself. I kept telling myself, this is just what it's like to have a friend you didn't expect to make. This is just what it's like when someone surprises you. This is just warmth. This is just gratitude for someone who actually listens. By April, I wasn't sure I believed myself anymore. But I hadn't started not believing myself enough to do anything about it. I was still in the phase where the rationalizations held most of the time, where I could get through most days without the floor tilting under me. I was still, as far as I was telling myself, just a person who looked forward to Wednesday nights. I told myself that all the way through May. It was a Tuesday in June when the floor first tilted. I remember it clearly. The kind of clarity that only happens when your nervous system decides something has happened that needs to be archived in high definition. I'd come into the building lobby at 7:45 a.m., earlier than usual, because I had a conference call with a client in London at 8. The lobby on Tuesday mornings belonged to the maintenance and cleaning crews. They did the floors before the main wave of tenants arrived, and the lobby smelled of that particular industrial clean smell that meant the day hadn't started yet. Lei was mopping the marble near the elevators. She had her back to me. I know this sounds like nothing. I'm aware of how it sounds, but something about the particular posture of her, the slight forward lean, the automatic rhythm of the mop, the way her shoulders moved, the line of her neck visible above the collar of her uniform, something about it stopped me in the lobby door. I stood there for probably 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when you're a person who doesn't stop. Then the door to the stairwell opened, and 2 maintenance staff came through talking loudly, and the moment broke, and I crossed the lobby and pressed the elevator button, and Lei turned because of the sound and saw me and said, "You're early." "London call," I said. She nodded. Dipped the mop back into the bucket. "There's fresh coffee at the security desk. Mrs. Garza brought it." It was practical information. It was the kind of thing she knew and passed along because it was useful. That was just Lay. She noticed things and passed them on. I'd seen her do it with a dozen people in the building. The UPS delivery times, the elevator maintenance schedule, which floors the heat had been running high on. She paid attention. She remembered. She gave the information to whoever needed it, freely, without any sense that it cost her something. I knew all of this. And still, standing in that elevator lobby with my briefcase and my 16-hour day ahead of me, something in my chest did a thing I didn't have a name for when she mentioned the coffee. Like a small, warm collapse. Like the word care pressing against the inside of my ribs. I went upstairs. I had my call. I billed 7 hours. I thought about that lobby moment 4 separate times during the day. I told myself I was tired. I told myself that when you're overextended, small kindnesses hit harder than they should. I told myself this was nothing more than my body acknowledging that I hadn't had enough human contact lately, that I'd been running too long on caffeine and case files, and that what I needed was to call Diane and have an actual conversation about something that wasn't work. I called Diane that night. We talked for an hour. When we hung up, my first thought was that I wished I could tell Lay what Diane had said about the partner meeting, because Lay would have had something quiet and cutting to say about it that would have made me laugh. That was when I started to feel the first real pull of something I couldn't explain away as easily as the others, because I could rationalize the lobby. I could rationalize staying late on Wednesdays. I could rationalize the 2 cups of tea and the things I told her that I didn't tell other people. All of those had narratives I could build around them. Loneliness, friendship, gratitude, the simple pleasure of unexpected connection. But wanting to share a specific private moment with her, specifically her, over anyone else in my life, that didn't have a clean narrative. I filed it away. I kept moving. The next few weeks did not make things easier. Simone noticed something first, which in retrospect I should have seen coming. Simone notices everything. She has the particular social intelligence of someone who grew up in a large family and had to read rooms to survive, and she applies it to the office with the same precision I apply to depositions. She sees things before they have names. We were getting lunch in late June, the Thai place 3 blocks from the building that we went to when we needed to say things that couldn't be said inside the office walls, and Simone looked at me across her pad CU and said, "You've been somewhere else for about 2 months. You know that, right?" I looked up from my noodles. "I'm right here." "Physically," Simone said. "Your other half is somewhere else." A beat, or thinking about someone. I kept my face professionally neutral. This is a skill I've developed over years of depositions and negotiations, and being a woman in rooms full of people who are waiting for you to flinch. "I don't know what you mean." Simone looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who has decided to let it go for now, but has absolutely filed the information for later. "Okay," she said. She let it go. I ate my noodles. I thought about Lay for the rest of the afternoon. The thing about Lay, the thing I was starting to become unable to ignore, was that every time I was with her, I felt like a more accurate version of myself. Not a better version, necessarily. Not a shinier or more impressive version. Just more accurate. Like I'd been reading myself off a slightly blurry photocopy for years. And somewhere in those Wednesday evenings in the kitchen on floor 14, the original had started coming back into focus. I noticed things about myself when I was with her that I hadn't noticed before, or hadn't wanted to notice. I noticed that I was funny. Not the dry, professional humor I deploy strategically in work contexts. Actually funny. The kind of funny that surprised me too, that came from somewhere genuine. Lay laughed at things I said, and I could tell she meant it, and there was something unsettling about being believed in that specific way. I noticed that I was tired. Not physically tired. Existentially tired. Tired of performing. Tired of the specific kind of performance that my life required. The buttoned-up efficiency, the measured responses, the careful management of how much of myself I let into any given room. With Lay, I didn't perform. I didn't know how. She'd seen me rattling a kettle for 45 seconds. It was too late for performance. I noticed that I was lonely in a way I'd never admitted to myself. Not lonely for people in general. I had people. I had Diane and Simone and my sister who lived in Connecticut, and my mother who sent me articles about work-life balance, and a whole office floor full of colleagues who respected me. I had a full, populated life. I was lonely for the specific thing that happens when someone actually sees you. Not your output. Not your competence. Not the version of you that shows up to do the work. The thing underneath all of that. The thing that's just you in your own kitchen at 9 at night, making tea and not being quite sure who you are outside of what you produce. Lei saw that thing. I didn't know how exactly. She just did. And the more she saw it, the more I noticed a new sensation running alongside the warmth. Something more complicated than warmth. Something that had edges. Something that, when I was alone in my apartment and not actively suppressing it, felt a lot like longing. I did not allow myself to complete that thought. Not in July. Not in most of August. But I started doing things that told on me whether I was completing the thought or not. I started choosing my outfits with more care on Wednesdays. Not dramatically more. Not in any way I could be called out for. But I noticed myself pausing longer in front of the closet, reconsidering, picking things that were professional, but also something else, something more present, more deliberate. I told myself this was just because Wednesday was usually when I had client meetings. This was barely true. I started learning things about accounting. Not seriously, not formally. But I found myself reading articles when I had 20 minutes between tasks, picking up terminology so that when Lei mentioned something from her coursework, I'd actually understand what she was describing. I told myself I was just curious. I am a person who is curious about many things. I started noticing other things too. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands. The small crease that appeared between her eyebrows when she was thinking through something complicated. The fact that she always started cleaning a room from the far corner and worked toward the exit, which I'd decided was either force of habit or the kind of ingrained logic that becomes invisible once it's second nature. I noticed that she never asked me questions I wasn't ready to answer. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. I'd been in relationships, professionally and personally, with people who pushed when I went quiet, who interpreted silence as withholding, who needed me to be more transparent than I was able to be in that moment. Lei never did that. She'd let a subject drop with the same ease she'd let it arrive, and there was no performance of patience in it. No pointed sighing, no strategic silence designed to make me feel guilty for not opening faster. She just moved on, and somehow in moving on, she made it easier to come back. I started dreaming about her. Not dramatically, not in the way that would force me to confront something immediately, just small dreams. Dreams where she was in a room I was also in, doing ordinary things, and there was a warmth in the room that I associated specifically with her presence, and I'd wake up with a residue of that warmth that took a few minutes to dissipate. I told myself, this is just what it feels like when someone matters to you. This is friendship. This is the particular texture of a friendship that started unexpectedly and has become something you depend on more than you realized. That's all this is. I was lying. I just hadn't gotten to the part where I admitted I was lying. That came in September. It came because of a single moment that I couldn't explain away with any narrative I'd been building. And once it happened, I had to make a choice. I could file it and continue, or I could stop filing things and actually look at what I'd collected. I was in the conference room on 14, late on a Wednesday night, working through a contract that had to go out by morning. The building was quiet. Lei had been through the conference rooms an hour earlier, and I'd barely registered her because I was mid-sentence on a clause that wasn't working, and she'd come in and done the room around me with the particular consideration she always showed when I was deep in something. No interruption, no noise beyond the minimum necessary, and when she left, she hadn't said a word, just touched my shoulder lightly with 2 fingers as she passed, the way you touch someone when you want them to know you were there without pulling them out of what they're doing. I'd barely registered it in the moment. I was in the contract. About 40 minutes later, I finished the clause, and I sat back, and I became aware, with a kind of full-body clarity that surprised me with its completeness, that I could still feel the exact shape of those 2 fingers on my shoulder. Not metaphorically, literally. The specific weight of them. The specific warmth. I sat with that for a moment. Then I put my head in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just sat there, and for the first time in 8 months, I didn't immediately start building a story around what I was feeling. I just felt it. And what I felt was this. I was in serious trouble. After September, everything was different, even though nothing changed. That's the thing about knowing something you've been not knowing for a long time. The world doesn't rearrange itself. The world stays exactly the same. You're the one who has shifted, and you have to live inside the old arrangements with this new and complicated understanding, and nothing is easier for it. Usually things are harder. October was hard. I started paying attention in a different way, not the unconscious cataloging I'd been doing before, but something more deliberate and therefore more dangerous. I noticed things and knew I was noticing them. I felt things and knew I was feeling them. The comfortable blur of plausible deniability was gone, and in its place was a hyper-awareness that made every Wednesday feel like something I wasn't sure I could survive and couldn't stay away from. I noticed the particular way she paused when something I said landed differently than she expected. A kind of stillness, not frozen but settled, like she was taking the moment in before she responded. I noticed that she always remembered everything I'd told her and never made a show of it. She'd referenced something I'd mentioned 3 months ago in the most casual possible way, like she just kept things. Like the things I told her found a place in her that had been ready for them. I noticed that when I was in the middle of a story and got to a funny part, she watched my face before the punchline, not after it. Like she was more interested in the moment I thought something was funny than in the thing itself. I noticed, with a horrible and specific clarity, that I did the same thing to her. I wasn't sleeping as well. Not dramatically badly. Nothing that would show. But those extra 20 minutes in the morning, the ones I used to use for a second cup of coffee and something mindless on my phone, were now occupied by lying in the dark, running conversations back through my head. Things she'd said. Things I'd said. Things neither of us had said, but that had existed in the space between our sentences anyway. I became obsessive about the appropriate distance to stand from her. This is embarrassing to admit, but I was. In the kitchen, in the conference rooms, in the hallway, I was constantly aware of exactly how far apart we were, constantly calculating whether the distance I'd chosen was normal, or whether it was too close, and this was the part that made me want to put my head through a wall, whether it was suspiciously far, like I was avoiding something. I couldn't find the right number. Every distance felt like a statement. I started avoiding her on some weeks. Not completely. I'm not sure I was capable of complete avoidance by that point, and anyway, it would have been too conspicuous. But I started manufacturing reasons to leave before 9:30, took work home, told myself the case needed me, told myself I was just being responsible. The first week I left early. I drove home in the rain and sat in my parking spot for 11 minutes before I went inside, and I am not sure what I was doing there exactly, waiting for something, waiting for some part of me to catch up to some decision I hadn't actually made yet. The second week, I told myself I felt fine about it. The third week, I came back on a Wednesday night at 9:15 and went straight to the kitchen. She didn't say anything about the weeks I'd been absent. She just looked up when I came in and said, "There's a crack in the tile by the copy room window that's been there for 2 weeks. I put in the repair request on Monday." "Thank you," I said. "There's also a bird that's been getting into the building through the loading dock," she said. and it spent 40 minutes in the conference room on Thursday, and I had to chase it out with a broom. In case you were wondering why there's a broom in the conference room. I laughed, longer than I meant to. She smiled at her cleaning cloth. And just like that, the 3 weeks dissolved. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. I was both. In November, her daughter came to the building for the first time. Lay's usual sitter had canceled, and there was a scheduling conflict she couldn't resolve, and Petra came to work with her for a Friday evening shift. A small 8-year-old with Lay's same steady quality, not shy but not loud either, with a book tucked under her arm and an assessment in her dark eyes that suggested she decided things about people quickly and quietly. She sat at the security desk and read while Lay worked. And at one point, I came through the lobby on my way out, and Lay was at the desk talking to her, and Petra looked up at me with that assessing gaze and said, "You're the one who doesn't know about the kettle." I stopped walking. Lay put her hand over her mouth. "Lay told you about the kettle," I said. Petra nodded seriously. "She said you tried to pour water that hadn't boiled yet. That's dangerous." "It's not that dangerous," Lay said. "I may have slightly dramatized it." "You said she stood there shaking it like it was broken." "You're 8, Lay said. "You're not supposed to be this much of a liability." Petra went back to her book with the satisfied expression of someone who had accomplished something. Lay looked at me, and there was something helpless in it, something soft, and I found that I had no practical thoughts available to me at that moment, just the warmth, just that specific warmth, and the particular version of her I was seeing right now, the mother version, the person who described her daughter to me with exhausted pride and now had to reckon with that daughter being an instrument of minor humiliation. I loved it. I loved the whole thing. I said goodnight to Petra and goodnight to Lay, and I walked out of the building and made it approximately to the corner before I had to stop walking for a moment. I stood on the corner and I said, quietly, to no one in particular, "Okay. Just that. Just okay." Like some interior court had called for a recess. I didn't know what I was going to do with any of this. But I was done pretending I was in a place where it wasn't happening. By December, Lay had started leaving things for me occasionally. Small things. Nothing that required comment or explanation. Once it was a sticky note on my coffee mug in the kitchen. "The handle is loose. Don't carry it full." Once it was an article printed and folded on my desk about a marine biology research station in Maine, with no note. Just the article. Once it was 2 ibuprofen tablets on a folded piece of paper towel outside my office door on a night when I'd mentioned, offhandedly, that I had a headache. I kept all of them. I put the article in the drawer of my desk and I didn't tell anyone about it. I also started leaving things for her. A better transit map for the route she'd mentioned she was finding complicated. Information about a night shift accounting study group that met near her neighborhood, which I'd found without meaning to when I was looking up something for work, and noticed it and wrote it down before I could think about why I was doing it. Once, on a Wednesday night when she'd mentioned in passing that she hadn't had time to eat dinner, I brought 2 portions of the takeout I'd ordered and left one in the kitchen with a note that said "only yours," because I couldn't figure out a sentence that didn't reveal more than I wanted it to. She ate it. The next Wednesday she came in with a container of something her mother had made, a rice dish I couldn't identify but ate entirely, and left it on the kitchen counter without explanation. I understood. This was the language we were speaking. Careful, practical, deniable, everything framed as ordinary. Everything existing slightly adjacent to what it actually was. I think we both knew. I think we'd both known for a while. But naming it was a different thing than knowing it. And neither of us was ready for the naming, for different reasons. My reasons were, I didn't know what I was exactly. I'd been with a woman once, briefly, in law school, in a context that felt more experimental than revelatory, and I'd filed it as an experience and moved on. I'd had relationships since, one that lasted 2 years, one that lasted 8 months, all of them with a fundamental quality of almost that I'd attributed to compatibility and timing and busy lives. The possibility that the almost had a different source hadn't occurred to me. Or hadn't occurred to me until now, anyway. I didn't know what Lay's reasons were. We didn't speak about any of this. We spoke about her coursework, and the bird in the conference room, and the ibuprofen-appropriate situations in my life, and whether the crack in the copy room tile had been fixed. It had not. It took 3 more weeks, and a strongly worded email from me to building management. We spoke about Petra's book report and Simone's department meeting drama that I summarized for her like recapping a show we both watched, and Lay found better than me, always, and my plant, which had begun its 3rd year of improbable survival. We spoke about everything except what was between us. And I know, that what was between us was growing exactly because we weren't speaking about it. Unspoken things take up more room than spoken ones. They expand into whatever space is available, and we were giving it an enormous amount of space. And by December, it was filling every room I walked into whether she was there or not. I dreamed about the lobby, about standing in the lobby door in October light, watching her work, and staying there instead of walking forward, about what it would mean to just stand there and let myself want what I wanted without immediately converting it into something manageable. I woke up from that dream at 2 a.m. on a Thursday in December, and I lay there for a long time. And I thought about what it meant that the most honest version of myself was the one that showed up in my sleep when I wasn't supervising. I had to do something. I just didn't know what. And I was afraid that if I got it wrong, if I named it and she looked at me differently, if I broke the particular shape of what we had in the attempt to call it something, I would lose the only thing in my daily life that made me feel like a whole person. So I held it. I held it all the way to February. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, you already know the feeling Ruth is carrying. That weight of something real and unnamed, living right beneath every ordinary moment. If this story is doing something to your chest, click the like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel keep bringing you stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit the bell. That way, YouTube lets you know the moment the next story goes up. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever known exactly what you were feeling and still been unable to say it? Not because you didn't have the words, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way you weren't ready for? Tell me. I read every single one. And where are you watching from? Drop your city. I'll respond with a heart. Now, back to Ruth. February arrived with the particular cruelty of February, gray and long, the kind of month that makes everything feel like it's been going on forever and might continue indefinitely. I was in the middle of the worst case of my career to that point, a contract dispute that had expanded to include 3 subpoenas and a scheduling nightmare, and a client who called me at 7 a.m. on weekends to ask questions I'd already answered. I was barely sleeping. I was eating at my desk. I was running on the particular grim fuel of deadlines that don't care what you're feeling. Wednesdays had become the only reliable thing in my week, which is how I know I was further gone than I'd admitted, because I had a full life with many things in it, and the one I was counting on was a woman I saw for 20 minutes in a hallway. The night it broke open started ordinarily. I was in my office at 8:30, working through the subpoena language, when I heard the cleaning cart in the corridor. I heard it the way I always heard it now, with a specific kind of attention, a slight adjustment of internal frequency, like a radio picking up a station. I kept working. She knocked on the open door. She always knocked, even when the door was open, and said, "I'm doing offices tonight. Do you need me to come back?" "I'm fine," I said. "Come in." She did. The cart stayed in the hallway. She moved through the office with her usual efficiency. Trash, surfaces, the corner plant that was not mine, but belonged to a colleague who had left it and forgotten it, and that Lay had been keeping alive for 2 months on her own time. She watered it. She'd been watering it the whole time. I don't know when I started thinking of that as something that made me need to sit very still. I was watching her from my peripheral vision while pretending to read a brief. This had become a specific skill I'd developed, the ability to watch her without appearing to watch her. I was not proud of this skill. She was quieter than usual tonight. I noticed it the way I noticed most things about her now. Before I meant to. Before I could decide whether I wanted the information. "You're quiet," I said. She paused. "I'm working." "You're always working. You're not usually this quiet." A longer pause this time. She had her back to me, redoing the supplies on the cart, and she didn't turn around. "Petra's sick. Bad sick. Fever. My mother's with her." She was using that controlled voice people use when they're managing something, not suppressing it, just keeping it in its lane. "She's had it before. It always sounds worse than it is." "Does it feel like it sounds worse than it is?" A beat. "No," she said. Quietly. I put the brief down. She still had her back to me. I watched the line of her shoulders, the way her hands had stilled on the cart. Lei was the kind of person who kept moving. Even when she was talking to me, she was usually doing something with her hands, straightening a supply, rearranging, keeping in motion. She had stopped moving. "Go home," I said. "I have 6 more offices. I'll tell the building coordinator you were pulled for a family emergency. No one will question it. Go home." She turned around then. And the look on her face did something I wasn't prepared for. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was just tired. Really tired. The kind of tired that's been there for a while under the functional surface. And the functional surface has been doing a lot of work. "Ruth." "Go home to Petra," I said. "She's sick and she knows it when you're not there." "Go." She looked at me for a moment. I looked back. The look lasted too long to be ordinary. Both of us knew it. I felt it in the air between us, a shift, a slight change in atmosphere, like the pressure dropping before weather. She nodded, started gathering her things. I turned back to my brief. She stopped at the door. "Thank you," she said. "It's nothing," I said, which was the biggest lie I'd told anyone in recent memory. I heard her leave. I heard the cart in the corridor. I heard the elevator. And then I sat in my office in the quiet. And I pressed my fingertips to the edge of my desk and I breathed. I breathed until the feeling settled into something I could name. And the name for it was, I love her. Not I think I might be falling for her. Not I am developing feelings that I should probably examine. Not I am experiencing something unfamiliar that could be classified as attraction. I, Ruth Ellison, who had spent the better part of a year building elaborate narratives around every single thing I felt, so that I didn't have to call it what it was, had sat in my office on a February night and admitted the complete, unambiguous truth. I love her. I love the way she waters a plant that nobody else remembers. I love the specific quality of her silence, and the specific quality of her voice, and the way she holds her coffee cup with both hands, and the way she speaks about her daughter with exhausted pride. I love that she asked me whether any of my reasons for not being a marine biologist felt like mine, and that she didn't wait for the answer, and that somehow that made it the most important question anyone had asked me in years. I love that she remembered everything, and never made a show of it. I love that she told me about the kettle and about the bird in the conference room, and that she left an article about marine biology on my desk without explanation, because she saw something I'd said and thought I should know it was still possible. I love her. I sat with that for a long time. It was terrifying. It was also, underneath the terror, an enormous relief. The specific relief of finally putting something down that you've been carrying without realizing how heavy it was. I stayed in my office until after 10, finished the brief, sent it, turned off the light. In the lobby, I stopped at the security desk and confirmed with Mrs. Garza that Lei had been officially noted for a family emergency, no impact on her record. Mrs. Garza looked at me with an expression that was professionally neutral and told me she'd made the note. I drove home. I sat in my parking spot for 14 minutes this time. What was I going to do with this? The practical part of my brain, the part that had passed the bar on the first try, that had made junior partner in 4 years, that had kept a plant alive for 3 years through sheer stubbornness. The practical part ran the analysis. She was the cleaner in my building. I was a junior partner at a firm on the 14th floor. This was not an uncomplicated power differential. I was older. I had more institutional stability. These were not reasons nothing could happen. They were reasons I needed to be careful about how I proceeded, because I was in the position of the person with more structural power in this situation. And that mattered. It mattered more to me than how I felt. She might not feel this way about me. I turned that one over for a long time. Because everything I'd cataloged over 18 months, the specific attention, the things she left for me, the article without explanation, the way she'd said Ruth with that slight pause, it all pointed toward something. But I was not a reliable reader of my own situation here. I was too far inside it. The evidence could be friendship, could be genuine warmth without what I was feeling underneath it, and I had to hold that as a real possibility because the alternative to holding it was assuming. And assuming in this direction was a way of making her responsible for managing my feelings, which she hadn't agreed to. I was also, and this one sat lowest, and I hated admitting it, I was also afraid, not of her, of the version of me that would have to exist if this went anywhere. The version that would have to say out loud, to people who knew me, what I felt, and who I felt it for, and what that meant about me that I hadn't fully worked out yet. Not because I was ashamed, but because I had spent 33 years building a very specific self, organized, controlled, clear-eyed, someone who knew what she was doing. And this was a place where I genuinely did not know what I was doing. And the not knowing extended into questions about myself that I hadn't expected to still be sitting in at 33. I went inside. I ate crackers in the dark. I started to have a conversation with myself about what honesty looked like in this situation, which took a long time and did not fully resolve. And then, because the case was still a disaster, and Petra was sick and none of my feelings cared about either of those things, I went to sleep. I didn't see Lay the following Wednesday. Building maintenance schedule had shifted, which Mrs. Garza informed me when I stopped to ask, keeping my voice carefully level. Lay had been moved to a different rotation for 2 weeks. I went home that Wednesday at 7, ate an actual dinner, watched something I didn't remember afterward. The 2 weeks were the longest in recent memory. When she came back on the 3rd Wednesday, I was in the kitchen at 9:30, and I had not manufactured this. I had simply been there because being there was what I did on Wednesday nights, and I heard the cart in the corridor, and I felt the frequency adjustment, and I poured the second cup of tea. She came in. She looked at the 2 cups. She didn't say anything for a moment. Something moved across her face that I couldn't read fast enough, and then it settled into something quieter. She took the cup. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," I said. We stood at the counter, drank our tea. She told me Petra was better. I told her the case had finally turned a corner. She said she'd known it would. "How?" I asked. "Because you never let anything stay broken," she said. "You don't know how to." I held my cup with both hands. Something about the way she said it, "You don't know how to," not as criticism, not as limitation, but as a fact about me that she'd observed and accepted and was simply reporting back. It did something to my chest that I was going to have to figure out what to do with. "Some things don't get fixed the way you plan," I said. "Not about the case." She looked at me. "No," she said, quietly. "Also, not about the case. Some things take longer than you think they will." The kitchen was quiet. The building was quiet. We were 2 women in a too bright kitchen at 9:30 at night, and there was something in the air between us that had been building for 18 months. and was now so present I could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. I looked at her. She was looking at me with the particular quality of her attention that I had been cataloging and trying not to catalog for nearly a year and a half. Focused and warm and honest. She wasn't performing anything. She never did. She was just looking at me the way she looked at things she was actually seeing. "Lay," I said. "Ruth?" she said. We both stopped. It wasn't a moment for speeches. I knew that about myself. I knew that any version of this where I had prepared language was going to come out wrong, was going to sound like a deposition, was going to be the professional version of me stumbling through the door first, and the actual me struggling to catch up. So I didn't prepare language. I just said, "I've been here on Wednesday nights for 18 months. You know that." "I know," she said. "And I've been bringing 2 cups of tea and telling you things I don't tell other people and leaving transit maps on counters and being very—" I paused, very careful not to know what any of that was about. She was very still. "And I don't think I can keep being careful about it," I said. "I'm not sure I'm built for that kind of careful anymore." A long beat. "What kind of careful are you built for?" she asked, and the question undid me a little. Because it was such a lay question, not deflecting, not rushing past what I'd said, just asking the next honest thing. She always asked the next honest thing. "I don't know yet," I said. "I know what I feel. I don't know what to do with it that isn't—" I stopped, tried again. "I don't want to get this wrong." She set her cup down. She said, "You haven't." I looked at her. "You haven't gotten it wrong," she said. "The transit map, the ibuprofen, the article." A small pause. "The building coordinator." Another pause. "The tea." I put my cup down. The distance between us was exactly the distance it always was in that kitchen, which was not very far, and which had never felt like this before. "I don't know what this looks like going forward," I said. "That's okay," she said. "I mean practically. I don't know." "Ruth." She said it with the pause before it, the one she always used, the one that meant I need you to hear this. "I know you need to plan. I know you need to know where things go before you can be in them. But some things—" She paused, and there was something careful and tender in her voice. "Some things you don't plan. You just decide to be honest. And then you see what happens." I breathed. "I'm honest right now," I said. "I know," she said. "So am I." The next 3 weeks were not a resolution. I want to say that clearly, because I've told this story a few times now. In my head, mostly, lying awake running through it at 3 a.m. the way you run through something that still surprises you. And I've noticed a temptation to round the edges, to make the conversation in the kitchen into a declaration, to make the weeks that followed into a clean arc. They weren't. They were more tentative than that, and more real for it. We kept the Wednesday nights. We kept the tea. But something had shifted in the room. The thing that had been unspoken was now acknowledged, without being fully spoken. And we were both adjusting to that new weather. Lay had said she was honest too. I knew what that meant. I knew also that she was careful, that there was history there I hadn't fully asked about and she hadn't fully offered, and that she was moving at the pace that felt right to her, and that my job was to not make her pace wrong. I was still figuring out my own pace. In the 3rd week of February, Simone stopped by my office at lunch and said, "Something is different with you." "You've said that before," I said. "Before it was unresolved. Now it's more—" She studied me. "It's like you finished a brief you'd been working on for a long time." I looked at her for a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Simone said comfortably, and took a piece of my lunch and didn't push. I called Diane that Sunday. We talked for 2 hours. At the end of it, I told her, carefully, at the edge of saying it, Not quite there yet. There's a person. At work. Sort of at work. It's complicated. What kind of complicated? Diane asked. The kind where I haven't figured out the vocabulary yet, I said. A pause. Ruth. I know. Are you okay? I think so, I said. I think better than okay. I don't know how to explain this. I stopped. Started again. I think I've been reading myself off a photocopy for a long time. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. Softly. The way you say I know when you mean I've been waiting for you to figure this out. I didn't ask her what she meant by that. The fourth Wednesday in February, I was in the kitchen at 9:30. Leigh came in and saw the 2 cups and smiled. Not her startled realization smile, a different one. Warmer. More decided. She took her cup and stood beside me at the counter. We were quiet for a little while. Petra asked about you, she said. I looked at her. She did? She said, and I'm quoting directly, "Is the kettle woman coming to school pickup?" Leigh's voice was dry. I don't know how to feel about the fact that she's named you after a kitchen appliance. I laughed. What did you tell her? I said I didn't know. She was looking at the counter, not at me. I said I hoped so. Something settled in my chest, warm and quiet, like the kitchen itself. I hope so too, I said. She looked up at me then, and what I saw in her face was not a question. It was something older than a question, something that had been sitting in her a long time, watching and waiting and being careful in the same way I'd been careful, for her own reasons. She'd told me I hadn't gotten it wrong. She'd said she was honest. And now she was looking at me with an expression that was fully uncovered. No functional surface, no managed distance, just her face in the kitchen light, telling me something she didn't need to say out loud. I reached across and covered her hand with mine. Just that. Just my hand over hers, on the counter, next to the cups. She turned her hand over. We stood like that in the quiet kitchen for a long time, not saying anything, not needing to. The building was still. The February night was outside the windows doing whatever February does, and I was standing in a room I'd stood in 100 times before, except that this time nothing was filed away. Nothing was managed. Nothing was carefully stored against examination. I was just here, present, unhidden. She was beside me, warm and close, her hand under mine, and for the first time in longer than I could account for, I felt exactly like myself. Not the version of myself I'd constructed, not the junior partner, not the woman who passes the bar on the first try and keeps the plant alive through sheer force of will, just me. The woman who wanted to be a marine biologist and didn't. The woman who tells the truth to someone she met in a hallway at 9:30 at night when she couldn't tell it to anyone else. The woman who finally, after 18 months of elaborate, careful management, was standing in a kitchen holding someone's hand and not pretending she didn't want to. I squeezed her hand lightly. She squeezed back. You're going to have to let Petra call you the kettle woman for at least 6 months, she said. Her voice was soft. I'm aware, I said. She'll move on eventually. She's named one of her stuffed animals Elevator. The phase doesn't last forever. That's comforting, I said. I thought it might be, she said. I looked at her sideways. She was almost smiling. The kitchen light was the good kind, the LED kind, the one that made her eyes go honey dark, and she looked tired and real and entirely herself, and I thought, I want to know this face for a very long time. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't have to. We finished our tea. She gathered her cart. She paused at the door. Same time next Wednesday, she said, not a question. Same time, I said, She left. I washed the cups. I turned off the kitchen light. I went back to my office and stood for a moment in the dark with the city visible through the windows and the building quiet around me. I felt, in the specific way you feel things when they're true, unhurried. Like I'd been running toward something for a very long time and had finally arrived at the beginning. I used to think love arrived with certainty, that it would be clear and legible, and I would know it the same way I knew a strong argument, by the quality of its structure, by how well it held up. I was wrong. Love arrived like the tide lay once described, quietly, steadily, covering everything before I realized I was standing in it. And by the time I realized, it was too deep to wish away, too real to manage. I stopped trying, and the word for what I felt, standing in that kitchen with her hand under mine, was not complicated or uncertain or hard to explain. It was quiet, the right kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever held something true inside you because saying it out loud felt like more than you could afford, write the word quiet in the comments. I'll know you made it here with me. And if you want to stay in this world a little longer, the next story is right there on your screen. Until then, take care of yourself. You deserve to be seen the way Ruth was seen, and you deserve to stop filing things away.